Welcome to the Head Shepherd Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ferguson, CEO at Next Gen Agri International, where we help livestock managers get the best out of their stock. Before we get started, a big thanks to our three fantastic sponsors. Allflex, part of MSD, perhaps better known as Cooper's Animal Health in Australia, offers one of New Zealand and Australia's largest livestock product portfolios with a comprehensive suite of animal health and management products. Heininger is a one-stop shop for wool harvesting and animal fibre removal. The Heininger team have a deep understanding of livestock agriculture, backed by Swiss engineering and a family business dedicated to manufacturing the best. ProA Livestock Equipment have been delivering industry-leading livestock handling systems to producers across Australia, New Zealand and beyond for the last 25 years to improve on-farm safety, efficiency and profitability. We are grateful to our sponsors for their support, helping us bring Head Shepherd to you each week. And now it's time to get on with this week's episode. Welcome back to Head Shepherd. Today we're joined by Carel Teseling. Carel's the Chief Operating Officer at Angus Australia. He's spent some time at both Wagyu and Angus, so has come to Angus from Wagyu, but went to Wagyu from Angus. Prior to that, he was in Western Australia and prior to that in South Africa. A long history in beef cattle breeding, an absolute powerhouse when it comes to genetic evaluation of beef cattle, and a really enjoyable chat with Carel as we talk through what he's learnt over those years and what he sees as the future. He explains some of the genotype and genetic tools we use in a really clear and concise way. So I think there's a lot to pick up out of this chat with Carel, and we'll get right into that now. Welcome, Carel, to Head Shepherd.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, mate. We'll start with a bit of background, as we always do. As far as I can tell, you've had a career that's taken you from South Africa to WA and then to Armidale for a few different spots at Armidale. Maybe just run us through your sort of career to date.
It's always interesting to step back all the way to my roots in South Africa, and as I say before, we just love to be South Africans at the moment, even though I've been living in Australia now for 25 years with the rugby being played the way they do. Well, not everyone would necessarily love South African rugby at the moment, but it's interesting. So that takes me back to my roots in South Africa. I studied in South Africa, and of course, grew up in an Afrikaans environment where people sort of say, what, really? If I tell them that I never had to speak a word English until I was about 23, 24.
Oh, wow.
So Afrikaans is my mother tongue. And since then been in the Eastern Cape for almost 10 years, being the regional manager for performance recording in the Eastern Cape. And at the bull testing centre there, worked with all of the bull seed stock producers in the Eastern Cape, so different breeds, which was a fantastic opportunity to learn about different breeds and just understand all of that part. Then in 2000, decided to move to Australia. And we settled in Western Australia, mainly because Brenda, my wife, is a physiotherapist. So we got sponsored out to Western Australia, lived there for just over a year. And then, Angus Australia was looking for a breed development manager, and I applied, and rest is history. Got that then. Started with Wagyu 15 years later for 10 years, and started this year back at Angus again.
Yeah, right on. Excellent. We might go off a little tangent, then we'll come back to the story. But the one thing that's always, not amazed me, but always been intrigued by is the level of South Africa seems to be a hotbed of genetic development. Like, I guess back when in that pre-2000 era, there was so many great things done over there, so many great animal breeding sort of projects and work done. Is there any, is there any reason you can think of why South Africa sort of was leading the way?
Well, I think Professor Boomsma was certainly a big inspiration for a lot of people, and the environment that differs so much as well. So, of course, you have very wet and ticky areas in Natal, KwaZulu-Natal, and then into the Kalahari Desert, basically, where you have very dry and almost desert areas. So, and they tried to continue to look at which breeds fit those areas. And the Bonsmara, of course, has been developed by Professor Jan Bonsma up in Mara. So that's right up in the north of South Africa, but it's again hot and dicky as well, and tough environment that. So that is where they developed the Bonsmara breed. I think that it was certainly, and the government understood that genetics is a long-term investment, and they were prepared to make those investments to make the progress in those traits to make sure that there's profitability in the different breeds that they were looking at developing as well. And progeny testing and performance recording has been a big driver as well. And that's why I was in the Eastern Cape, is really the regional manager for beef performance recording. So they invested in having people like myself. We were trained geneticists to work directly with the breeders as employees of the government. So, and that was it was good. But I think that there was certainly that investment there. At the latter part, I was starting to get involved in quite a bit of the old homelands, which were the traditional areas where we then started to, of course, educate them as well about that they should really castrate animals, the benefits of removing males out of the population that's of substandard genetic merit, which was hard because they don't value animals the same way necessarily as what the commercial producers at that stage did. An animal was money in the bank for them. And so it's quite different. So that was, it was an interesting to understand where they're coming from was quite interesting to get an insight in that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. And then obviously, via a bit of time in WA, not sure how you convinced your wife to move to Armidale to get a nice and cold place after a couple of nice warm places. It's although I managed to get my wife to move to Christchurch, which is similar from WA. I guess maybe if we switch to, if we contrast your time at Angus and Wagyu, two obviously breeds that are taken off in those periods that you've been involved, and I guess differences are fairly obvious, but I guess similar concepts across whichever breed you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, I will probably delve a little bit into the two breeds. And from a personal perspective, is that it's quite interesting how people. When I started with Wagyu, they said, "Oh, now you're at the best breed," and then I went back with Angus, and "Oh, wow, now you're back at the best breed."
back from the dark side.
Slow down. And I think it is actually, looking back now, it was an incredible opportunity to have been with Angus almost for 14. I think it was just on 14 years that I was with Angus. Of course, being the breed development manager at that stage, looking at genetic progress, looking at introducing new traits, going through the development of gene prop which helped us in that time, Angus in that time when AM and NH and all of those genetic conditions were identified, developed those gene prop basically to be able to understand the risk and then allow people to start to manage that. And it was actually a groundbreaking period because up to that point, people were mainly, feedstock producers were mainly looking at genetic conditions. Oh, heck, we have a problem. And how can we almost wipe this under the carpet quickly before anybody finds out? And in Angus in that time, we just said, no. This can't be done this way anymore. And it was actually just the right time as well. It was a time when genetic testing or genomic testing, whichever way you want to express it, started to become mainstream.
Yeah.
And of course, you could then start, and that is what John Beaver was just an incredible scientist to work with, was to get him. He was involved. I was able to go over and get the tests developed also for Australia and build gene prov, and really helped. And from there, it was rolled out for all of the other breeds that used ABRI as well, of course. So that was interesting. And that 14 years there was just an incredible growth in Angus, and of course then moved to Wagyu. I'll never forget the first day I went into the Wagyu database and I did SQL run that and looked at the database, and I had a shock because I looked at that. I thought, what the hell? And I said to Graham Trowscott employed me there, and I said to him, Graham, what the heck? In Wagyu, or in Angus at that stage, we had almost I think if I remember correctly, almost 1.3 million animals in the database. And when I did that first look, there were only 73,000 animals in the database. This is not good enough, mate. I mean, what am I doing here? And so that was really, it was. I will call it a shock because I did not think that there was that few animals there. But I mean, then what we started to do is soon after that, I just discussed with the board in a strategic workshop that we have to move to SNP testing, away from MIP testing. Wagyu, of course, had a requirement that all animals needed to be parent verified to be able to be registered. And so therefore, I put it to the board that we need to change that from MIPs, which is microsatellites, to SNPs, which was really the driver of a lot of stuff that happened then. So they had a huge uptake of SNP testing, genotyping right in the beginning of that early stages. And then we were able to run parent discovery. So engaged with Dan from, now Helical, but Theta at that stage, and got a lot of that parent discovery done. There were many instances where people had commercial animals, they parent verified them, we run parent discovery and we pick up the parents. And those commercial animals could become seed stock then because we found the parents to be able to register them.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, all of a sudden there could be 20 progeny falling into places, progeny and grand progeny falling into place as well. So you just had these groups of animals that moved into the herd book at that stage as well. So that really helped. I mean, that there's now close to 500,000 animals in the pedigree. So certainly have grown dramatically. And of course, carcass trait is important there. So we've put in a few projects to bolster that as well. So they certainly have a lot of carcass data flowing in. And that's what's going to drive it. A lot of people, I hear that a lot. I shouldn't say a lot of people, but I hear that a lot where people say, well, this genomic thing is going to kill phenotyping, etc. And I immediately continue, and I think everyone now, or I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people do understand that now. You do have to do phenotyping. Yes, you do have the genotyping, and that helps, but your genotype gives you a first bite at the cherry, and from there, there's still work to be done. It gives you an accuracy, but if you really want to get to that really, really high accuracy, you have to have progeny testing. You do need to, the proof of the pudding at the end is in getting the calves performance recorded for whatever trait. If it's carcass trait, you have to get carcass killed. You have to have some progeny killed to make sure that that animal actually have the genetic makeup that you thought. So they are different, but I think that both breeds focus a lot on carcass. I think that is why the two are really so complementary. To me, I had the opportunity to work for both these incredible breeds, different focus. I mean, Angus is certainly, in my opinion, the maternal component. That is just an incredible maternal component. Yes, and with good marbling. And then also, of course, Wagyu have incredible marbling. And then on the sire side, that's really, that combination of the two is just so potent.
Yeah, no, really interesting. There's so many different angles we can take from that, but one I think is worth clarifying for people, because I'm sure we've got plenty of nerds listening who would like to, back when we got rid of microsatellites and moved to SNPs, you want to just explain why that was such a fundamental shift and so important because that was a key shift a while ago now, but I think some people probably still don't understand what the difference between those two is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, microsatellites, of course, only had, and it depends on who you test it with, but at that stage we worked with UQ, and UQ basically had 15 microsatellites. So it's 15, let's call it 15 snapshots, which are more variable. So you actually had more results per per microsatellite than what you have with SNPs. SNPs you can only have 3 different outcomes. You can have AA, AB, and BB. Well, with microsatellites, you could, for the same microsatellite, you could have 115, 152, 128. So you could have a whole range of different outcomes for that specific microsatellite. So microsatellites actually did give quite a bit of power to exclude in a case of parent verification. But it was not the same as SNPs when you started to go to the high density SNPs, because then you look at possibly at that stage, it was mainly about that 24,000 SNPs. We didn't have the higher density chips at that stage. But what was for Wagyu the main thing is that microsatellite was a single use, throw it away. After you've done it and you've got the parent verification, you've spent the money, you throw it away.
Yeah.
It has zero further benefits. And that was my main driver, is that we have to invest in a platform where, yes, you spend the money, yes, you get your parent verification, but yes, you can then also start to move into the genomic era, where we actually have 20,000 snapshots of the DNA, where you start to get a much better picture of what's actually in front of you. And that was then where the chips also improved. So at that stage, it was, as I said, about 24,000 SNPs. Then a lot of them jumped up to 50. And of course, NeoGen in this last little bit are at about 96,000. And I think recently Weatherby's are at about that 80, and Zoetis is just under that, I think about 70. So they all have a lot more density now. Therefore, a lot more snapshots. You can really see a lot more what's going on the genomic basis of those animals.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. At the World Angus Forum, I think you used a credit card analogy, and you've just talked about sort of people thinking we don't have to phenotype anymore, or there's this sort of thought that there's going to be a whole swags of animals, and you see swags of bulls in catalogues that actually haven't been phenotyped for much. They're relying heavily on genotypes. Yeah, I guess maybe you've already explained it, but I guess, that it is critical. We, as an industry, we continue to invest in phenotypes if we want to get, and every breeder will get the value from that by being more accurate with those really finite selections. When it gets down to that pointy end of a breeding program, that slight increase in accuracy helps you make genetic gain.
Yeah, and I think that the benefit is that people can start to make earlier selection decisions, but do not put all your eggs in one basket. Then, if you have your herd and you select a group of bulls, do not select the one that's the highest. For instance, you should really look at those, almost that team environment where you say that, okay, I'll pick 4 or 5 bulls that's in that area, because that's the challenge that we sit with is it's only. You could probably set about 60% accuracy just on genotypes alone. So what that means is that you have 60% of clarity on that specific EBV. So there's 40% almost unknown there. Yeah. And then I think that is what people sometimes lose track of, is that even though we quote an EBV, that EBV can move up and down. And in a single animal, of course, that it can stay the same, or it could go up a certain amount, or it could go down. But if you have 4 or 5 animals, between those 4 or 5 animals, you'll end up very close to that average, because a few will go up, a few will go down, a few will stay the same, and you end up with the same average. But on the individual animals, of course, they could go up and down. I think that's the first step. The second step then is to continue to collect additional information. It's always hard when you, after the progeny come through, and you realize, my bull is starting to creep down or creep up. But in those cases, that is part of the learning that's happening with genomic information at the moment as well, is that as we get more genomic information linked with phenotypes, the system gets better at, let's call it, identify those genomic blocks almost, and it identifies that through relationships between different animals. So if you have a young animal that you've just genotyped now, the system basically looks and say, okay, what are you related to? So equivalent of that is it looks for the DNA or the genomic blocks that's the same. And they say, wow, I can find a cow there, or a bull there, or a steer there that has been slaughtered. Excellent marbling. And I can see that a lot of the DNA that you have is the same as that. And of course, it then say, yep, therefore I give you quite a bit of benefit also, that based on your genomic profile, that I expect you to be relatively good in this. Or, of course, the other way around as well is, oh, heck, I can see that you're really, I don't think that you're going to do much. And same principle. So it can, of course, be up or down. But that is the benefit of having it, is it do give you a pretty good insight, rather than if you didn't have that, I mean, you really had nothing. And I think that is the difference as well, is people, I hear that sometimes with people say, no, the pedigree tell me that this animal must be really good. And sometimes it's hard to explain to people, but if you have, let's say, two average animals, two average parents, and for simplicity purposes, you have, of course, then half of the genes are good and half of the genes are bad in the sire, and the same, half of the genes are good in the dam and half the genes are bad. You could have the good half of the bull and the good half of the dam recombine in the calf, and you can have an excellent calf. Same parents can give the bad half of both parents, and you have a shocker of a calf.
Yeah.
So how can you say that you know what's going to happen? And it's the same. Even if you have a good sire and dam, there are still some genes there that's not good, and therefore if those ones recombine, you could actually have an animal that are below average. And I think that's a real simple way of explaining it, but that is where genomic information come in. And instead of having to use the theoretical averages of what you can get, you can actually start to look at the DNA and get a better feel for which specific parts did this actual calf got, rather than having to work on the averages.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points there. One being that you've pointed out clearly is that when people do things like do genomics, they expect that improvement in accuracy. That means that things will go up or go better, but that's not always the case. That there's just as many going the other way as up, or the other way is better. And I think that's a really good, clear way of explaining that. And I think people look at their siblings, they know that they've obviously got different genes from mum and dad than each other, but somehow in breeding we think that these two are the same dam, same size, so they should have the same outcome, but that's never the case.
Yeah, we're 5 brothers, and the other 4 all got the brains and the I'm buggered.
Oh, well, mate, you got it. At least you can do genetics.
Yeah.
Excellent. One of the contrasts we see, well, it seems obvious to me anyway, between Wagyu and Angus is that Wagyu are way more worried about what's hanging on a hook than in a maternal breed, and in Angus you've got to think about lots of traits. There's still a significant aspect of the industry that is worried about the phenotype, or is focused on getting the phenotype match with the production or in the performance parameters. I guess, I don't know, this might be being unkind, but in Wagyu it seems much more just performance focused and not too much worried about what they look like. Is that a fair assumption or incorrect?
Yeah, I would say be careful there. and I mean, I am also a little bit careful answering that question, because of course I love Wagyu just as much as I love Angus.
Yeah.
And it is interesting that there are certainly more of a focus on the performance, on what, as you say, what's hanging as a carcass. But there's certainly also people that are looking for the phenotype. So I remember that there were a few that said no. High tails are not necessarily something that I allow in my herd, and that they are selecting against that. I think the important part is that a lot of people forget that the more traits you try to improve at once, the less progress you make. And that's a worry to me sometimes, because And I will say that here, selection indexes have that you run a risk with pushing your selection index value very hard. Is that selection index try to improve all of the traits that's used in that selection index? And for commercial producers, that's fair enough because they're not marked very well. But in the case of seed stock producers, their herds are benchmarked. They know in which traits they are strong and in which traits they are not so strong. So my opinion is in cases like that, we should actually have people that identify exactly what area their herd needs more improvement in and focus on those rather than just pushing for the whole index. And I think that is basically what's happening in Wagyu as well, is that there's not many of those Wagyus that fall apart in the feedlot. I can tell you that much. So therefore, do you go and say, I don't like how that foot angle looks like? If the animal is not breaking down, why do you fix it? Or why do you want to fix it? And it's an interesting concept, and I think that people just need to continue to think through that. Of course, it depends also on their size. Angus are a bit heavier than Wagyu as well if they are out working in the paddock, so that has an effect. But certainly with the steers, those Wagyu steers are very heavy as well because they've been fed so long. So I don't know. That's just one of the bits that I think that understanding of the traits and which traits are important and focusing on them, I think as for both breeds and for any animal genetics and or breeding, I think people need to continue to consider that. So in my current position, that's something that I started to flag already with a few of our directors and also members, is that perhaps that's something, perhaps after 25 years of having breed object indexes where it focuses and tries to improve all of the economically important traits at once, we may now need to get to a point where we say, is that necessary? Do we start to get to a point where we allow people to make up their own index, where they can say that in my head, I wish to improve docility, for instance? Because docility is one of those very hard ones where a lot of people say, wow, this is so important for me. And I say, how many dollars is it worth to you? I say, I don't know. And I say, but to be able to include it in a economic value type index, you have to have economic value associated with it. There's other index metrics that you can use, and desired gains is one of those, where you actually don't try to estimate the economic value of the specific trait. You just say, I think I'm weak in this area. I want to improve this specific trait. How much do I want to improve it? So use growth, for instance, as a simple one, or weight. You say, I want to improve my yearling weight with 10 kilos. And all we do then is we calculate that back to heritabilities and to the genetic variation, calculate that out. And once you've identified 3 or 4 traits you want to improve, we calculate for your specific herd which animals are your best animals moving forward. And therefore, yes, it will probably be calculation-wise challenging, but these days we have the computer systems to do that. So I'm confident that we will, well, I'm not even confident, I can tell you that's something that we are going to investigate for Angus moving forward, is to be able for a person to sit in his office, say, I'm going to go to that sale in a week's time. This is what I want to improve in my herd. Pull those bulls in as well and show me which of them will take me in the right direction, and calculate it on the fly for them and say, these are the animals based on the gains that you want to make, the bulls you should go and have a look at, and determine that for them there and then on the run. So that's some of the dreams.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I can tell you it's possible because that's what we do with Next Select. So all is well. So so yeah, I mean, it's 100% agree that particularly in the herds that know what their genetic where they're at, you can obviously there's different weightings will take you to different places, and standard indexes will try and improve everything at the same time. But very interesting. At your time at Angus Wagyu and now back at Angus, you've brought a lot of traits brought new traits in. There's a range of things kind of new recently, other things probably under development, things like condition score, I think is my favourite, and hip height. Those ones are going to be really interesting to go forward. We had an industry trying to use fat as a proxy for condition score, which wasn't working particularly well. We've got MSA grading. We've got a range of different things coming in. I guess is there a never-ending list of traits that people want to add, and you've got to be careful, or is it sort of what's that process of working out when a new trait needs to come into the system and how that sort of comes into being?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because people do get overwhelmed, and I think that is where potentially we could even look at combining traits. So to have ribbon rump fat, really, they are so highly correlated, they should just become carcass fat.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few of those that we will seriously look at combining. Fertility is also one where, depending on when you measure it, you could get different outcomes. The difficult part is to then weigh them and say, well, yes, when you have a heifer fertility, that's great, but it's only for a short time in their lifetime that they are heifer. Hey, the main component of their life is as a cow. So isn't that cow fertility more important?
Mm-hmm.
And if the two are not 99% correlated, you'd have to almost build, I hate to call it an index, but you always have to build a weighting between the correlations of those two and then combine them into a fertility trait or into a fertility value. And that is where I think we will certainly have the same number and or more components, but then we will try to push those components together so that it doesn't overwhelm people. And then, of course, out of that, then I believe that if they have the ability to focus specifically for their herd on a specific trait through the gains that they want to make specifically, even if it's not, they can't put a dollar value on it, I think that there will be benefit for them to be able to do that then. And then really you don't have a problem with having 20 or I don't want to call it 30 traits, but as long as the person know where their herd sits, so their herd is already benchmarked, then they can work out where their weak points are, where they want to improve, and push those. Don't try to push all 20 at the same time, because you're going to go nowhere.
Yeah, and so one of the challenges, as we say, all right, we want to have say the conditions called breeding bay, for example, and one of the challenges is to do that breeding bay, you need to collect the phenotypes, and while people are collecting the phenotypes, they're often not getting any result from them. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg normally with developing new traits. You kind of have to get the industry excited enough to collect a heap of phenotypes that they don't see immediate response from.
Yeah, we try to cover that a little bit with our side benchmarking program. So it is certainly a program that we invest in heavily, and the board and also membership understand the benefit and the need for that. So we certainly try to get as much out of that as possible. So even traits that we are thinking of that may be important or of value in future, we are already starting to collect. So we're already looking, for instance, at how can we collect pink eye information. So Liam, who is in charge of our SI benchmarking program, is already looking at, okay, even if we have to collect 5 or 6 different things, how can we potentially then combine them later on to give us a value? And even we may even invest in collecting something now, and after 2 or 3 years realize that was useless. But at least we've tried, and we've had a look at trying that out. But I believe that just keeping an eye out for what's possible to collect and investing that little bit extra in the side benchmarking program help. And what we've seen is that normally once we then have walked that road a little bit, we always get members that then get on as well and start to collect that information too, which of course then start to feed the system and help us to do a better job.
Yeah, very good. Let's go to technology, then I'll come back to genomics quickly, but I guess in that where do you see technology helping, as in at the moment? Well, I guess historically it's been humans weighing things and measuring things and whatever. Do you see as we've seen a lot more machine vision type projects, other sensors, all sorts of stuff happening in plants as well as on farm? Do you see, I guess, that technology, genomics, that whole ecosystem changing over the next decade or two?
Well, the next decades or two is not my problem, but the next decade is. Yeah, I'm confident that of course that will have an impact. It's sometimes challenging because we already have people that say, yes, we really want to have better food score information available, and of course, they walk in the paddock and you try to take a photo of a foot, that's not so easy. And therefore, we will have to look at how can we do stuff like that. There's already projects here at uni as well that's looking at movement, so locomotion, which will hopefully help also to say, well, this animal doesn't seem to walk very easily and or naturally. And I think that type of things will certainly help. I think also with 3D modeling of looking at how long an animal is, how high, how deep. If you have a photo from either or a video from the front and or back or top, I think that we could certainly do a lot more there. I don't think we will necessarily just get rid of weights easily, but I'm confident that the computing power now and machine learning is at the next level. So I'm confident that will have a big impact on where we go to next.
Yeah, excellent. Me too. Just want to quickly go back to genomics, and as we've moved to lots more genotyping, and so we're relying a lot more, and we've got herds that are kind of moving away from pedigree into full genotyping. And one of the, I guess, challenges has been that some of those bulls that were sitting at, I don't know whether it's traits that haven't been measured well, but you see some that catalogues that just shift a lot as they've got genotyped, and there's kind of everyone saying that, it's the genomics is broken, or this is broken, or that's broken, or whatever. I guess, when they see those big shifts as genotypes get involved, what's the explanation, I guess? And I'm not at all trying to be controversial, just providing an explanation around that. But
yeah, no, and that is certainly the case, is that people, a little bit of unknown throw people where they just immediately say, no, that can't be, it's just not possible. One need to remember that it is actually looking at the reference population, and it's look at that animal. And if that animal is very different from the population, the accuracy of that animal is not going to increase. So, and also, if the accuracy doesn't increase, the EBV normally don't shift a lot. If that accuracy shift and the EBV shift, it means that the system have been able to look at that genotype of that animal and say, whoa, I've seen this before.
Yeah.
And therefore, then it will say, well, I've seen this before, it wasn't good, maybe. And people don't necessarily want to hear that. But once you start to look at genomics now and look at how animals are related, of course, an animal gets 50% from the sire and 50% from the dam. That's just how it works. But once you move to the next generation, it can actually get 30% from the paternal grandsire and 20% from the paternal granddam. So you get that 50% split up differently in the two grandparents. And therefore you do have this change where even if people say, oh, I know this grandparent and he always pass on whatever, it just doesn't work that way. And so I think that is the baseline understanding that people have to have, is that genomics do look at that reference population. Of course, if you have no animals in the reference population that has phenotypes, that makes it a bit hard. Then it drives off correlations, etc. But that is why everyone still have to continue to focus on getting good phenotypes in, which are linked to genotypes. Just to have a phenotype in without genotypes, you're not helping the future of being able to identify animals, even for your own herd, easier, better, sooner. And I will go back to Wagyu again. I've had breeders there that will look at the crop of calves. They genotype them at 3 months they already have the genotypes, get the genotypes back, they would castrate 80% of their bull calves at 4, 5, 6 months. And that 20% that they keep is at the top of their EBVs based on purely only genomic information. I've always said to them that please just look at, because we're starting to look at genomic variation as well, so that there's diversity. Go and find a few of those average animals that's very diverse and keep a few of them as well, please. And that is what people did as well. But that drive towards identifying the top 20 early on and castrating the rest and then moving on again certainly happened. And it is because there are now, I don't know, there's probably now about 30,000 carcass records there that's feeding that genomic information, which is incredible.
Yeah.
So and that is just showing to me that showed the power of how things can move as long as there's the drive for that phenotypes as well.
You mentioned diversity there, and I know something that you're quite keen on is to not end up, I guess, like the Holsteins, which have an effective population of 8 or whatever I don't know what the quote is, but I mean, there's a risk the better we get, the more accurate we get, we end up with shrinking down that population size, which then stuffs all the variation and then changes our ability to make genetic gains. So that's something we need to be aware of. What's the best way to manage that?
Oh, there's a few ways. I don't necessarily say all the best. But, I mean, one of the very obvious ones is to just make sure about your matings, and we've implemented mate cell for Angus. When was that? In end of July, where now, of course, members can go in, they identify their cows, they can nominate bulls, they can look at all of the bulls in all of the semen catalogues that we publish, and then decide on which traits they want to improve. Again, I urge people not to select 20 traits that they want to improve at the same time. But then what happened with mate cell, and there's other mating software as well, where it optimizes those matings, but it does it on two sides, because if people go in and do it in a spreadsheet, that's easy, and it will find you the highest averages on the EBVs, easy peasy. That's not a problem. Your problem is to not paint yourself in a corner in the long term on the relatedness side. And I explain it sometimes to people because they say, no, that's easy. I'm just looking at the inbreeding. And then I explain it to them that you could find for your whole herd a bull that is totally unrelated to your whole herd, and you could use him over your whole herd and you will not have any inbreeding. But all of those calves are 50% related to each other. So next year you have a problem because not because of inbreeding, but because of relatedness, how that the whole group of animals are now related, and all of a sudden you cannot just go out and find any bull to put over half of them because they are so closely related. And that is the problem then, is it is not about the inbreeding, that the co-ancestry of that relatedness is what you really have to keep an eye on, because that is what's going to keep you safe in that long term to be able to negotiate that or maintain the diversity so that you can continue to move forward on those sides.
Excellent. And I'm thinking that, well, it stands to reason that a lot of the mutations or deleterious mutations that would have arrived at it is because of a shrinking population. So you're sort of getting recessives turn up because of, I guess, are they new mutations, or are they just we're finding old mutations that are coming up, or both?
Well, I think it's both. Yeah. But I understand that 20 years ago, it was a shocker. If you see a calf with 2 heads, oh, heck, you don't tell your neighbor, you don't tell your wife. You kill it quickly and you put it in a deep ditch where nobody will ever find it, and that's it. Yeah. And I understand why, because if you're a seed stock producer and you realize, even if you don't know if it's heritable, you don't want your neighbor to know. Yeah. But these days, it is a whole different kettle of fish. The sooner people talk about that and that we have a look at what's going on, the sooner we can get on top of it. And it is not anymore that, oh, heck, that herd had a problem and therefore don't go and buy bulls from them ever again. We identify who the carrier animals are. You don't even have to get rid of them. You can just breed carrier to carrier. You'll have 25% of those animals, if it's a simple recessive, you'll have 25% of those calves being free. Yes, you could have 25% of them having two heads as well. You could have 50% of them carrying one copy of the gene, but you'll have 25% that's free. And therefore, if those animals are so good, and I don't say go and specifically breed carrier to carrier, but normally if you really find two carriers that exceptional, you can mate them. And because you can actually go and determine which animals are free, and you move on with them. And so therefore, it just opened up a whole world of opportunity where 20 years ago it was a different ballgame. Now there's certainly these opportunities that you can manage it because we can find those genetic conditions relatively easy. John Beaver have been doing that with, as soon as you have about 8, again, if it is a simple recessive genetic condition, if you have 8 affected animals and you have both parents that you can genotype, you can work out which animals are, of course, homozygous, the heterozygous, and then you go in the bigger population, and he's been able to identify a number of genetic conditions but with those numbers.
Excellent. Interesting stuff. The one thing that we're pretty keen to explore at the moment is heifer select. So using commercial breeders being able to use this same matrix of information or same reference population to predict into their commercial heifers to improve that selection accuracy on those commercial herds. Just maybe, that was a pretty rough explanation of how it works. Can you give a real explanation of how heifer select works?
CSIRO has been incredible for Angus Australia. They've been able to implement the first versions of heifer select. They've developed basically the SNP effects. So how that very simplistic work is that you have a reference population, you have that reference population's genotypes, and then you basically look at which are the best for a specific trait and which ones are the worst for that specific trait. And then it analyzes every SNP for every one of those traits and say, based on the good and the bad, very simplistically, this specific SNP is neutral, doesn't look like it has an effect, but I find this other SNP has AA, for instance, in the high value animals and a bigger frequency of the BBs in the low genetic merit for that trait. And then it therefore gives a value to that SNP and the outcome of that SNP. So it calculates a value for every one of those. So in future, when you test an animal, the system will say, okay, for this animal has an AA here, a BB there, etc. It calculates those values out and it spits out a value. So that's originally how it worked for every trait. And CSIRO developed that and it worked really well. Also, then we have updated the number of SNPs that it worked on. Initially, it was 35. Then we imputed up to 61,000 SNPs. But we're now in a position where we can actually run that analysis inside what we now term Angus Genetic with a Q. We've actually made an announcement of that today, so I can actually talk about it.
Excellent. Good timing.
Yeah, good timing. And so therefore, the heifer select is now run inside our multi-trait analysis, which makes it very, very different to a SNP effect model. Because now it is not being calculated based on the SNPs. It is also looking at the relatedness with other animals. So all of a sudden, you could have an animal that we know nothing about, except that they are high makeup Angus, and therefore it looks at that genotype, and it then calculates the value of that animal relative to other animals that have been phenotyped for that trait. And so it is actually pulling that information in. Of course, it uses all of the other genetic correlations that it also has, much, much more powerful. And that is where we are at the moment. The other benefit, of course, is we can roll out traits relatively quickly as well, because we develop all of those in-house. So we will be able to add to those traits in a timely way. And there are net feed intake. There's, as we spoke about, fertility a little bit earlier on. There's a lot of those traits. Pink eye, immunity. So we're looking at Immundex as well that has been developed with CSIRO. We're looking at bringing that inside our genetic analysis as well, so that we have those traits to run straight out of there. And therefore, there's nothing stopping us from then also expressing that in the heifer select values that people get back that they can then start to use as well.
Excellent. If you're running commercial herd, where would you use heifer select? So commercial producers sitting out there wondering how to be at the top. Do you do all your mature cows, or you just do heifers, or what do you reckon you would start with?
That's a tricky question. Because I would think that it does depend. If you have a lot of money, you do all your cows, of course.
Yeah.
But I would say that your heifers are probably the ones that's going to stay in your herd the longest, or potentially the longest. I would certainly not do cows that's at cull age already, because they're going to be out of the system in a year or two, and therefore the investment that you make on them, you're not going to be able to get your return on investment over 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 calves. So I would certainly focus on heifers or younger animals at least, and then of course also to either cull the bottoms. And because you will know, you can also look at your top animals, depending on how hard you want to drive genetic improvement. You could decide to flush some of those top animals then. So I think there are several ways. I don't necessarily know if commercial people would go into a flushing program, etc. But certainly at least culling that bottom part out would be a really good start to clean up your herd there. Of course, you can also have a look at then. No, you wouldn't have genotypes on the cows, so you won't be able to find the relationship unless you mother up. But I don't know how many commercial herds would mother up properly. So, but there are, if you are prepared to do extra work, you might be able to find a few of the dams of those really, really shocking females and just exit them out of the system as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Carl. It's been a fascinating chat. We better wrap it up. We're getting close to the hour mark. But you've had a career across Australia and South Africa. Is there any one that stands out as someone that was a really either inspirational or someone you've learned a lot from over that time?
That's a hard one. I've crossed paths with so many people. The one person that probably that I always find fascinating is John Beaver. For when he really dug Angus out of a hole. I know that he copped a lot of criticism. People were angry. I was actually acting CEO for Angus at that stage when those genetic conditions was identified in 2008. Grant Trust got decided just as well. I don't know if it's before or just as it was announced, but he decided to walk out the door. I actually think he already decided to walk out the door before it was. I don't think it was after. Anyway, so I was acting CEO over that period, and I can remember how a lot of people were very, very worried, very anxious. Some of them were extremely angry. Felt that we want to kill the breed, and John Beaver just continued to say, guys, yes, there's pain now, but it's going to save the whole of the industry a lot of pain in future. If we do not look at this and manage it well, the whole Angus industry is going to be in for a lot more pain. And probably that was, if I have to pluck one person out, it would be John. And he's such a down-to-earth person as well, just incredible. I mean, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. We've accidentally got the scoop on Angus genetics, so maybe just a couple of minutes about what that means. What is the announcement today?
Yeah, so it's of course, Angus have been developing an internal analysis now for almost 5 years. So there has been a lot of work done in the background I think people may have asked when Angus moved to TACE, which is then, of course, the trans-Tasman analysis, Angus analysis, that why the change? Because, I mean, it's still using breed plan to develop those or to calculate those EBVs. But what did happen then too is that there were additional EBVs coming in, and some of those were the Mundex that was developed by CSIRO, which, as we already said at that stage, and or even currently is using a SNP effects model. So that was becoming available, and there were, of course, now the body condition and the cow height traits are as well are now in our internal analysis. And basically up to this year, there wasn't really mention of the internal. I think some people knew that we had an internal analysis, but we didn't go out and promote that or make that clear. And this year, when I started, I said, well, guys, this is a little bit confusing, especially for me. and so we really started to think, okay, at what point are we actually going to indicate to the membership that we do have this internal analysis? And that is, Wagyu, of course, have made an announcement just a month ago, a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's virtually the same or very close to the same concepts and principles. And so that is where we're at the moment. The big difference is that Wagyu is going to turn off breed plan and turn on the analysis, while Angus is going to run the two head-on-head or together, so that breeders can look at both. Where do we go in the long term? I think that is one of the things that the board is currently thinking about and looking at different models and how we can accommodate that. But that is, therefore I have my own opinions.
So do I.
I think that it's much more important that the board think through those very carefully, because, of course, it has huge impact on members. Members have used the one system over a long period of time to breed their animals. I can say that it is actually not even interesting. It is heartening to see that we are in a position where you have two different systems. A very important, and especially, well, I don't know if it's especially, but a big difference between the two systems is actually that TACE, of course, include New Zealand Angus animals that are registered with New Zealand Angus, while our internal analysis do not include those animals. So, of course, you see differences in EBVs solely based on that. There's other ways of how the traits are described as well. Like in our internal analysis, we do not do pre-adjustments of carcass data. So we do not pre-adjust a phenotype, a carcass weight phenotype for age. And we also don't pre-adjust the other carcass traits for a carcass or standardize them for a carcass weight. We allow the system and the analysis to sort that out, which is what those models are supposed to do. So that calls it as well. But the heartening, or the bit that's really incredible for me, is to see how they point in the same direction.
Yeah,
they're not the same, but they're pointing in the same direction. I think that is the nice part, is to realize that, yes, you will have re-ranking, but certainly I'm very confident that it will take people still in the same direction.
Awesome, thank you. I said we were going to finish up. I just got one more question, and that's, you just sprung into my mind as you were talking then. G by E is something that we hear a lot about. Any evidence of G by E in the Angus analysis?
Oh, I think you will find G by E, but I think because it is to a lot of the phenotypes, at least, are within contemporary groups, that it takes care of a lot of that. There's been a lot of work, and especially in my first round with Angus, we've had a lot of looking at Tasmanian herds versus Queensland herds, and you could perhaps say that there's almost something found, but really, I mean, if you look at the practical impact on the ground in commercial herds, I don't think that you will have to say, wow, I should never have bought that bull or never have used that bull. That bull is still in that top area. There may be a little bit of re-ranking if you consider it or not, but your top bull is not going to become an average bull, moving it from one environment to another.
Excellent, thank you. And I should clarify, G by E is genetics by environmental interaction, which I guess, people often think that you can't buy a bull from Tasmania and take it to Queensland or whatever the analogy is. But if the reality is that if it's got the same set of breeding values, it should perform the same wherever it turned up from.
Yeah, fantastic.
Excellent, Carl. We'll finish up there. It's been fantastic to have a chat, and we are about to clock the hour, which is probably up there with the top 3 or 4 out of 250 episodes we've done. So well done. I'm not sure if we've got over
difficult questions.
It's obviously such a broad and deep knowledge of genetics, and particularly those 2 breeds you've had a lot to do with. So really appreciate your time, mate, and all the best for 2026.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for listening, and thanks again to our 3 fantastic sponsors. Heinegger, who are proud world leaders in the manufacturing and supply of professional sheep shearing and clipping equipment. Allflex Livestock Intelligence, part of MSD Animal Health, offer extensive livestock product portfolio focused on animal health management, all backed up by exceptional service. ProWay Livestock Equipment offer turnkey solutions from design through to professional installation and specialise in facilities that are tailored to your specific operation for all livestock species. We thank these 3 great companies for their ongoing support of the Head Shepherd podcast.